After experiencing autoimmune symptoms for over 15 years, going on a journey to resolve the deeper roots of them, and now being symptom free for 6 years, one of the biggest lessons that I have learned along the way is that the symptoms that we experience within our bodies are not separate from the symptoms that we experience within our lives and within our relationships. In this video, let's unpack what I mean by this so that you can start to identify the deeper emotional, subconscious, and nervous system roots beneath the chronic symptoms that you are experiencing without having to go search and look for them. So, first, let's explore how you may have been relating to your symptoms up until this point. If you're anything like me who got diagnosed and went through the initial process of shock and trying to understand what it was that your body was expressing, and then gradually looking for resources to help support your body and manage inflammation and address what your body was expressing, what you may have seen is that our body is largely treated as something that occurs in isolation, meaning we look at what is happening within the physiology of our body. And when we have a symptom come up, we often look at, okay, well, what's wrong and what test do I need to get and what supplement or dietary modification do I need to manage what's happening within my body and what medication do I need to go on to help fix or manage what my body is expressing. And there is a place for all of these questions. Of course, we want to address what is happening on the physiological level of our bodies. However, we are not just physiology. We are not just body. We are sentient beings with emotion. We have subconscious and conscious minds. We have these identities and these souls that are essentially guiding us through this journey that we are on within our lives. And so when we look at the body in isolation without looking at our psychology, without looking at our emotional patterns, our subconscious patterns, our nervous system state and patterns, we're missing a large piece of the puzzle when it comes to what is actually going on within our bodies beneath the symptoms that we are seeing physiologically. And so for me, as I started digging deeper and crossing off my list all of the other things that I could try and have already tried that weren't actually addressing what was going on within my body, what I started to understand is that the emotions, the feeling states, and the experiences that were coming up around my symptoms were not new. So even though the circumstances around my experience with symptoms were new, there were many feeling states and emotional patterns that were there long before the symptoms actually started, even though a lot of them were either repressed into my subconscious or largely unconscious to me. And so as I started to connect these dots for myself, what I started to see is that my relationship with my symptoms wasn't separate from my relationship with myself. And so I want to give you a couple of concrete examples here that you may be able to see yourself in, and then some ways that you can go about actually starting to bring awareness to what those deeper roots might be beneath your own symptoms. So for this example, let's take symptoms off the table here and just look at some of the themes that were going on within my life before symptoms even started. So one of the things that I have identified and seen is that oftentimes in my relationships, in motherhood, I largely felt unsupported. I felt like I had to be the one to carry so much of what was going on, and I gave a lot, but I also didn't feel reciprocated, that I was met. I often didn't feel like my needs mattered or that I mattered, and I felt like I was carrying a lot alone with this overall feeling of overwhelm and I'm unsupported. I also have identified that a lot of the time I had this underlying feeling of inadequacy, and whether that was around what I looked like or never having done enough, oftentimes I was internally rejecting or attacking parts of myself and not looking good enough or not having done enough. And a lot of the time I compensated by doing more and achieving more. But beneath a lot of that, I often felt like I wasn't enough, like there was something wrong with me, and had this fear that I was a failure going on in the background. And then once I started experiencing symptoms and flares and going on this journey of actually making connections to what these underlying roots on an emotional level, a subconscious level, a nervous system level actually reflected, what I started to see is something that I couldn't unsee once I saw it. So, the same way that I often felt unsupported in my relationships, I was now feeling unsupported by the medical system and even by my body. And the same way that I had felt like something faulty was going on within me, that there was something wrong, like I was a failure, and simultaneously, actually, like I was being failed by those around me in my closest relationship. I was now told that my body was failing me, like there was something inherently wrong or faulty with my body. And so, even though the circumstances were very different, I couldn't help but see that link and that mirror between what was going on within my physiology and actually what was going on beneath the surface with my psychology and how I actually related to myself and these different emotional patterns that I held and these subconscious beliefs that I held about myself, and even what was happening on a nervous system level. Because although I didn't see it at the time, I was largely operating in these mixed survival states of either flight and feeling like I constantly had this pressure and urgency to do more, and also simultaneously would shut down or freeze or disconnect from myself when things got too intense or overwhelming. And at the same time, what I can see so clearly now is there was this internal fight going on within me where I was constantly at odds or battling what I should be doing versus what I needed to do. But it was so deep within my unconscious that I wasn't fully aware of it at the time. It's something that when I look back, I can pinpoint that there was this little voice there that would tell me that I needed to rest or that would indicate that something didn't feel right. But I often put it aside and didn't listen to it, or I would have this like mental battle back and forth about what I should be doing or what I needed to be doing. And that same hypervigilance or defense mode that was going on within my nervous system was largely being reflected in that overdrive, that overactive immune response that I would often experience along with flares. And so essentially, what I started to see is that what was going on within me physiologically was not separate from what was going on within me psychologically. And that really our physiology and our psychology are not separate. They are interconnected through our nervous system, which essentially links through every system within our body, including our immune system, including our digestive system, and many other systems within our body. And so, my experience with my health and my chronic symptoms didn't necessarily create the belief that I am supported or that there is something inherently faulty or wrong with my body or that I was failing and figuring it out or being failed by the system in terms of actually resolving what was going on within my body, but rather it gave me another place to actually experience what was going on within me on an emotional, a subconscious, and a nervous system level. And from my perspective, what I've seen here is it's not because the body is faulty or broken, but rather it is such a highly intelligent system whereby those underlying psychological patterns are going to be reflected because we are being held accountable and actually being invited to bring them up into our conscious awareness and to begin to shift how we are relating to ourselves, the beliefs that we hold about ourselves, particularly when they're not congruent with actual truth, what is true in the here and now, and when those beliefs and patterns are no longer supportive to our well being. Now, in terms of where these underlying beliefs and patterns actually come from, the important thing to understand is that they aren't conscious. We don't wake up in the morning and consciously think to ourselves that, hey, I'm going to operate from the belief that I'm unworthy today, or that my needs don't matter, or that there's something wrong with me. Instead, a lot of these are formed much earlier in life through certain experiences that we've had with key caregivers and people within our lives. And what we essentially made those experiences mean about ourselves based in what we could understand at the time, based on our developmental state and the context that was present. And so for you, maybe you grew up sensitive and had circumstances where you needed emotional support from the adults around you, and they either didn't have the space or didn't have the capacity, or they themselves felt uncomfortable with emotion. And so they didn't meet you there. They weren't able to meet you there. And so over time, perhaps what you internalize is that I have to carry this by myself and I'm unsupported. Or perhaps you were validated in certain ways from your parents and caregivers, teachers, and community. Meanwhile, you felt shamed or disapproved of when you would express other parts of yourself. And so you concluded that you needed to do those things that were validated in order to earn love, but that underneath all of that, you weren't enough as you were. There was something inherently wrong with you as you were. There are all sorts of different possibilities. And I'll also link a video here where I'll go into more depth on these topics around where these patterns actually come from. But for now, it's important to know that essentially what happens is these core beliefs and conclusions that we make become part of our subconscious. They become wired into our nervous system, into our identity, and essentially become the lens through which we experience life. And even though the adult version of us may consciously know that we are worthy of support and that we desire support and that emotions are safe and that we are enough as we are, if that subconscious piece, which essentially comprises about 95% of our awareness below conscious level, still carries unreconciled experiences and what we had internalized through those and the unprocessed emotion involved, we can essentially be at odds between what we consciously believe and desire and what we subconsciously believe and are creating within our life through that, because really it's our subconscious that drives our choices and our decisions. And so essentially those relational symptoms that may come up in the form of triggers aren't necessarily wrong, but rather opportunities to bring the unconscious or the subconscious up into our conscious level of awareness so that we can start to reconcile them, feel through any unprocessed emotional energy or survival stress there, and actually come into deeper congruence within ourselves. So if you're listening to this and you are perhaps feeling the resonance in what I am sharing, or seeing yourself in some of these patterns or beliefs, or even just curious if there may be deeper roots present beneath the symptoms that you experience, the question then is, well, how do I identify what those deeper roots actually are? And the key to understanding this is that it's not necessarily about going and looking for them, because a lot of these beliefs and patterns actually live within our subconscious, which means oftentimes they live within our blind spots. And so, what I find to be much more useful is asking the question, what repeatedly takes me out of ease within my life? What are the reoccurring symptoms that show up within my life, within my relationships? Where do I find myself feeling triggered or reactive or even shut down, and experiencing my life or myself in such a way that isn't necessarily how I desire it to be, and starting there. So I'll include a list of prompts here on the screen that you can screenshot and come back to actually reflect on and just get curious around what may emerge, so that you can start to perhaps see reoccurring patterns or themes that are showing up within your life, and how those may actually mirror similar feelings that you have in response or in relation to the chronic symptoms that you're experiencing as well. And this is where things get really interesting, because this is where the symptoms in and of themselves become the doorway into understanding what may be presenting there on a deeper level rather than the thing to be fixed. And I find that this completely shifts the way that we are relating to both our symptoms and to pain. And it's very difficult to be both in a state of curiosity and in a state of fear at the same time. And so the more we can actually put ourselves in that place of curiosity and start to put on that detective hat to understand these connections and patterns between the symptoms that are showing up within our body and the symptoms that are showing up within our life and within our relationship, this really helps us to start to see those symptoms as invitations and communication rather than as problems to be fixed, even though I fully acknowledge how inconvenient, uncomfortable, and painful they can be at times. So, of course, there's a time and place for this. It's not necessarily about ignoring physical symptoms or not doing our due diligence or homework when it comes to medical appointments and understanding what is going on within our body and managing a large reaction or flare, but rather starting to create some space for that curiosity and to see those connections as they begin to emerge. And so, in closing, this interconnectedness between the symptoms that show up within our life and the symptoms that show up within our body is one of the biggest lessons that I have learned through my own journey that has actually allowed me to delayer the underlying roots beneath my symptoms and reach a point where I have been in full recovery of any symptoms for the past 6 years. And so, whether you start reflecting on how it is that your symptoms make you feel and how those feelings might be familiar through past experiences, or whether you are actually looking at the triggers that show up and take you out of ease within your life and how those may map to your symptoms, either of these are really great places to start to become curious around those deeper emotional, subconscious, and nervous system roots that are often present beneath chronic symptoms. I would love to hear in the comments what this brought up for you, if you are seeing that interconnection between the symptoms that are showing up within your life and the symptoms that are showing up within your body, what further questions you may have. And if you are feeling resourced enough, I also invite you to access my free guided rooting practice, which actually takes you into a process of feeling into those deeper energetic and nervous system roots that may be present within your body. You can find that link below, and I will see you in the next one.